Okay, yes, it's been a few days since I said I would do it, but the problems of having ADOS, my brain goes off in a million different directions, as you probably noticed by having so many different types of videos. But this time, it's a follow-up to my previous one about were the disciples of Paul not debunked. And my point here is, let's go with the hypothesis that Paul's Christianity is the type of Christianity that we know. In that, for instance, say the disciples' Christianity was closer to Judaism. It didn't have Jesus as God. It didn't have all the extra baggage that Paul brought. Now, why wouldn't the disciples have gone out there and debunked Paul? Like, why wouldn't he be completely destroyed? Well, here's the problem. According to Paul, it was 2 years after he started spreading Christianity, at least his version, that he went to speak with James and speak with the others, the disciples. At that point, he'd already started to spread his gospel throughout cities. Paul was focusing on the Gentiles, so his would have had more converts. It would have been spread because the Gentiles would have been more susceptible to a new type of religion. Also, he wouldn't have been limited, where the James and group would have been focusing more on Jews, because it sort of implied that it wasn't until after Paul met up with them that they decided Paul would do the Gentiles, where the disciples would do the Jews. So why is this a big deal? Well, Paul would have spread his gospel, his version, further with more people. So you would very quickly have a much larger group versus the smaller disciples. And how could the disciples, focusing mostly on the Jews and probably around Jerusalem, have been able to combat a much larger, quicker growing religion, even if they were completely opposite? Like, for instance, let's say the disciples were closer to the Gnostics. How would they have competed? And since Paul was for the Gentiles, his would quickly have become the dominant religion. The disciple version may still be there, but it would have been limited in scope, and it wouldn't have been able to compete. That's, for instance, when James and Paul met. James destroyed Paul's version of Christianity. Well, all the churches that he had started would have been spreading and growing, expanding already. So destroying Paul there wouldn't have stopped spreading, even if Paul himself decided to stop. You're comparing a small group focused on one area with a larger group expanding. So how could disciples have stopped him if Paul's version of Christianity was completely made up? Because remember, he never met Jesus. Everything he knew about Jesus was from the Christians that he had tormented before his so-called conversion. So his would have been the phone game. He wouldn't necessarily have had the actual facts. Plus, being Paul and not speaking with disciples, he would have gone back and looked at the Bible and tried to find stuff that fit the Jesus that he knew now. So how would it have fit? I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. Rate, comment, or subscribe, because this is definitely, I think, brings up an interesting question about what would have happened back then.